In the first part of this mega module, we really looked at the kind of the setup of this, right? Setting up deployment, what does it mean to do deployments, manifests, what happens during deployments, and then we set up our environment to kind of have some functional parity on premises so that we could push to the cloud. In the second part of the module, the two-parter, we're going to look at actually doing the deployments and the troubleshooting and the scaling and so forth. So we just finished building out the environment locally. Hopefully pretty exciting, getting a Ruby, Node, Mongo app running completely within one kind of isolated workspace, either on your desktop or in the cloud server. Now the next step is how do we actually now deploy this? Let's deploy it to Cloud Foundry. Let's start the CLI, which we're going to do. We're going to create a cfignore file just so we don't push all of the node modules up to the server. And then we're going to go push the application and test it out. This should be a lot simpler now because now we don't have to do a lot of that maintenance that we just did to install Ruby and configure things. All of that's in the PaaS. All of that's sitting in Cloud Foundry. It's all configured. All we need to do is push our application to that fabric. Let's go ahead and jump in. Alright, so now that we've gone through the excitement of making things work locally, let's actually make them work in the cloud. So this part will be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and do a CF login. Let's get into our Cloud Foundry environment. We're still targeting the same endpoint, so we don't have to change anything there. I'm going to pick our developer space, development space. That's where we've bound our service instance to. And we're ready to go, so we're in good shape there. So right before we push, jump into your mod2 before donation web service directory. What we want to add here is a cfignore file. This is so we can say, you know what, don't push this giant collection of modules up there. It's probably full of stuff, 10 megs, 11 megs of space. Go ahead and run this on the server. Go ahead and pull the latest ones from your cache or go grab them from public, but you don't need to send these up to the server. So let's ignore those. So I'm going to create a new cfignore file. And it can be tricky on Windows to create just a dot file, so if you put dots on both sides, it actually works. So we have a cfignore file. Let's go ahead and open that up. And the format for this is pretty straightforward. You don't have to do too much with this. You're really just picking directories that you want to exclude. So in this case, we can simply type in node_modules/ and save that, and that just means it's going to ignore everything in that directory. You can do this with file extensions and things like that. So in this case now, we're telling it to go ahead and ignore that directory. Great, so now let's go ahead and deploy our Node.js application. If you remember from our manifest, if we look at what we've got here, which would be deploying an app called PS Donation Web Service and binding it to our service instance. So let's go ahead and switch to our project directory. We're at c/demos, we're in mod2, we're in the v4, and we're in the web service. So before we push this, just to make sure, I'm going to look at my manifest. Remember, it's PS Donation Web Service. I'm going to make this 1, in the off chance I've already got a few hanging out there. Let's go ahead and make that. That's the name of our app, our memory, our instances, and we're good to go. Now, back in here, I can just do a cf push. You can see it tells you what it's doing. It's creating the route, the URL that it can access. It's binding to the service. It's uploading all of the bits to create the necessary droplet after it goes ahead and stages it on a DEA. And then it goes ahead and tries to start the app after it goes ahead and uploads and stages and runs it. You can see it's installing all the dependencies because we excluded the node module, so it's got to go ahead and do all the npm install of all the dependencies. And it says it's running. It says I've got PS Donation Web Service 1.cfapps.io. This should actually return something since it is an Express application. It does return that. But let's go ahead and test out what we tried before in Fiddler, because now this should also work here. We can make a request to the actual endpoint, donors 100, donations JSON. That's PS Donation Web Service. Make sure I get my URL correct. Get back at 200, of course an empty request, nothing there. That's fine. Let's go ahead and do a post and actually put something into our managed Mongo database. Let's set the content type and just make sure we're not messing around with anything else. Let's pick a different amount. This time we want to make sure we're posting to the right place so we don't have the donor ID in there because I'm not being truly restful. You can yell about me at that later. Alright, so if we do another get and we pass in the name of the donor we care about, if we look, hey, we got back 7,500. So we got back the donor. So now this is running purely in Cloud Foundry. I can see here I've got this running. My instance online should have things in it. This is all cloud-based. So let's go ahead and push our other application. One change I want to make first, though, is if we jump to donation web, if we look at the config initializers, I went ahead and created a constant for our cloud URL. So let's go ahead and edit this. And it's PS donation service 1, just to make sure it doesn't get confused there when we push our Ruby application. And so what we'll do is now navigate back and push our Ruby application. Let's make the whole thing work. Donation web, and we'll cross our fingers and do CF push. And actually, to play it safe, let's make sure on donation web, I'm also going to change this manifest to be PS donation website 1. Whoever the first person to take this class is, feel free to take 2. So we'll go ahead and push our Ruby application. We can also easily check on the pivotal site that our MongoDB already has content in it, but we'll go ahead and let this get pushed first. What's pretty cool is, again, we didn't have to worry about all the setup tasks. The application environment was already ready to go. It's running the necessarily install scripts. It's making sure things are working right. It's taking care of that for me. We don't have all that heavy lifting to do. All right, so it looks like the application is started. That's already started. If we happen to jump over here, we refresh, should have 3 applications up and running. What's also neat is what you'll notice is our Mongo. If we click on Manage, we noticed, remember in Fiddler, we made a couple of calls just to test our environment. Well, we can see we do already have some stuff in here. We have a document already in here that we must have created through Fiddler. Sure enough, here's the one donation. So it's pretty cool that I can see I've created a cloud record already in the database. Let's go ahead now and hit that URL. This is the localhost version. Let's go ahead and create the one that's sitting up in the public cloud right now. And that's donor 102, which doesn't exist. Let's do 100. There's the $7,500 donation. So this is the one. This is the Ruby app now running in the public cloud, hitting the web service in the public cloud, returning database from the MongoDB in the public cloud. All of this now running perfectly fine. And we'll talk about these commands in a minute, but if you run CF apps, I can see here are my apps, what is their state, how many instances, how much memory, what their URLs are. All of this now working perfectly fine in the public cloud. Congratulations. So once I've deployed an app, which we've just done successfully, what does it mean after that? PaaS isn't just about deploying apps quickly. It's about how am I using a PaaS to compose applications, design them, deploy them, and run them. So once I've got an app I'm ready to run, what are some things I got to keep in mind here? So I've got things like looking at my quota. How am I doing? Am I bumping against up any of my limits? Do I need more organizations or more space? I'm going to look at events and logs as I'm troubleshooting, seeing what applications are writing out, seeing what different CF components are writing out, whether it's DEAs or routers or so forth. And I'm going to be constantly checking out the application health and what's been allocated. I want to make sure everything's healthy. I have enough instances. I've got enough resources to handle spikes in usage and things like that. So while the app is running, I'm doing a lot of different things to check out how healthy is it, what kind of logs is it writing, does it have what it needs. Let's talk about scaling and updating applications. Specifically, as we talk about scaling first, really 2 vectors here. I can scale up and down, or I can scale in and out, meaning I can add more and remove more capacity from an individual instance, or I can add more instances or delete more instances. When I'm scaling up and down, I can add disk or memory. So that can be handy if I want to put a little more headroom on an individual instance. I'm not ready to scale out yet. I still have some room I might want to scale up. This affects all instances, though. If I double the RAM, I'm doubling the RAM for every instance, each container that represents one of my application instances. So you have to do that with that in mind. This is applied while running. It doesn't have to restart anything. I'm pretty good to go. I'm adding more disk or memory, and that just takes effect, and everything's great. Scaling in and out is about creating and destroying instances. This is where that sort of graceful shutdown, the quick startup really comes into play, so that I can instantly go from 10 instances to 100, and I should be able to do that in a matter of seconds and minutes, not hours. And so I want to make sure I do that gracefully and quickly. The benefit there is things are auto load balanced. So that's one of the nice parts of Cloud Foundry, among other things, is that as I'm adding and removing instances, those are instantly being reflected by the router and those components that the workloads are immediately able to handle more instances. So I'm routing data now to new instances. As soon as something gets destroyed, it's taken out of the load balancer. So very dynamic, very fluid. It's a nice way of working. There's no built-in autoscale, so it's not going to automatically add or remove capacity. There have been some proof of concepts built in Cloud Foundry. There have been some nice demonstrations. You can programmatically do some of this and make it work. But it's not a built-in flag that's simply set. It's something you might have to think more about on how do I want to scale programmatically, or do I want to do manual intervention. As I'm looking at scaling, really you use the cf scale command. I might want to add more memory and use the -m and go up or down. I can go down from a gig to something less, or I can go to more. Likewise, I might want to add more storage and go up to a gig of space because I need that sort of local storage for a cache. I can also then do -I, which gives me more instances. This is great when I want to really quickly horizontally scale in or out. It's a really easy command, and that's where PAS really demonstrates its value, where I'm able to do that without having to go, again, change networks or firewalls or load balancers or any of that stuff, DNS. None of that comes into play. As an application developer, as an operations staff, I just issue a single command, and the platform is smart enough to know what it means to scale up. In this exercise, we're going to go ahead and just scale up. We're going to go scale up, we're going to look at consumption, and we'll scale out a little bit and see how all that plays. We're back here in our test environment for all of our demos, and I've logged back into my account. And what we're going to do is do some scale exercises. So I can issue a cf apps command, and I can see the health of all my apps. I've got 3 of them deployed, our Hello World we did originally, the web service and the website, both running with a single instance and 128 megs of RAM and a gigabyte disk size. So to scale, it's pretty straightforward. I can simply do cf scale, ps donation web service, for example, and I might want to change its memory up to 256, and I'll give it a qualifier there of M, and I've got to make sure I actually call things that have legitimate names, like 1. This will cause an app to restart. Am I sure I want to do that? Let's say yes. Some things do require a restart. Great. I'm only using 30 megs of my 256, but you can see now I have 1 running. You see the single instance return there. So if I do cf app and I do ps donation web service 1, you'll see it returns just the results for that single app. And I've got a single one running, piece of cake. If I also want to scale out, this is where I can scale ps donation website 1, and let's give instances of 3. And it says okay. I can just do a quick cf apps and see if it's lying to me or if it's telling the truth, and it's starting them up. So I've got 2 of 3 up and running. If I run this command again, I'm sure the 3rd one's already up and running. It is. So now I've got 3 instances of this returning it. And again, they're all stateless. It doesn't matter which one I'm hitting. Each one of these is hitting differently because it doesn't use sticky sessions in Cloud Foundry. Each one of these is returning work, and they're all scaling fine. I'm able to handle that capacity. Now notice, I'm using 128 megs of each, so my quota is starting to get a little tight. So I can also scale down pretty easily as well. If I want to do ps donation website, and I want to go I'll go back to 2. Once again, I've got to remember to put my 1s in there. It'll knock me back down to 2. And so again, this is where the gracefulness hopefully comes in handy, is that doesn't cause any problems. I'm down to 2, it's taking things away, it's probably starting things back up again to get me back to 2. Again, no interruption in service, I'm scaling really easily. Try doing that with traditional apps and web servers where it's a lot harder to ask for capacity, change capacity, and so forth. In this case, it's much, much simpler. Clearly, most applications have a life cycle to them. It's not one-time deploy static websites that never change. Instead, you're probably constantly making revs, maybe multiple times per day or monthly or weekly. And so what does it mean to do deployments in a Cloud Foundry environment of existing applications on top of it? So let's say you want to change the application code. You can do that. Go ahead and change the code, add more configurations, manifests, update the manifest if needed, if that's necessary for you to do, if you're changing new properties or adding new instances. Go ahead and do a cf push. the app instances automatically get stopped. So anybody who's trying to run that app does get a 404 while that push is running. So it does stop all the instances. It's trying to do that, prevent two versions of your code running at the same time. So it stops all the instances, updates all the instances, and then turns them back on again. We're going to talk in the last module about how you can do some no downtime updates and deployments, but by default, doing a CF push does take it offline. The app goes ahead and gets restarted. So doing an update, very, very straightforward. Something there's to be aware of, that does stop some things, but it handles a lot of the differences and uploading the right bits for you. You don't have to think through all of that. In our next exercise, we're actually going to walk through this. So what we'll do in this version is go ahead and make an application change, deploy that app, and just see the differences. Nothing too crazy, but simply be able to see what it means to have a change. And what we'll actually do is add a new text file and push that and see that exists there. We're back in our test environment, and I thought I'd go ahead and make a couple of changes to our website just to see those changes take effect. Now we can do some simple cosmetic stuff. If we go into our app folder, go into the views, it's an MVC project, go into donations, and let's go into the index, kind of the default page. Go ahead and throw this into Notepad, and so this lets us look at the view of how this all looks. We have make donation, we have all sorts of my silly quote at the top. And so let's say we want to make a small change to this. Let's say I didn't say this. I will unfairly say Bill Gates said this. This is not a Bill Gates quote. We're just having some fun here. We'll go ahead and save that. And the other change I want to make is let's go ahead to the root of the directory. And let's add a new file here. Let's just say hypothetically we were dropping a new log file into each one of these. It had some setup instructions or something like that. So let's go log.txt. And let's go ahead and throw something in here. Let's say this is v1.0045, whatever, arbitrary numbers. So we've got two changes to this application. Let's jump back to our folder of where this is. So let's go ahead and cd. We're going to go to c/demos. Again, we're going to cd mod2, cd before. We're going to change the directory to the donation web. And we're going to do cf push. So while it's doing that, we'll take my website offline momentarily while it goes ahead and uploads any changes and what's going on, gets those uploaded, stages the changes, pushes that out to each of the running instances, really recreating instances there, and it puts it right back online. Alright, now remember our manifest also set us back down to 1. So because I had one instance running, it knocked me back down to 1. So always be careful with those pushes. If you've made changes in production, the manifest will reset you unless you update your manifest as well. So keep that stuff in sync. But we do have one running now. We can see the last uploaded time was today, and the time it pushed, so it's good information. What's its usage? What's its consumption? Knocked it back down to, well, we didn't actually change this one, but it would have knocked this back down. So we've got all that. Let's go ahead and hit in the browser, see if the quote is different that it shows on the page. This one says from me. Hey, now it says Bill Gates, good for Bill. Let's go ahead and also see that log file that we did. So what's interesting, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but if you do CF files, you can actually see the files that are part of your application. So PS donation website 1, here's all the files that's actually uploaded. So I can see the different files that have been put together with the application. And I can also put a path on here, so I want to jump into the app directory, I can, and it shows me everything in the app directory. And so I jumped into that. You can see there's my log.txt file. So I can even go right to that path if I want to, and do log.txt, and it shows me what's in there, v1.whatever. So I can see my push, change my quote, upload a new file. I can even explore that by using CF files and look at the different things that are part of my application. So pretty cool to really simply do updates without any complicated stuff. I could update multiple running instances and have them quickly started back up again. Really, really nice way to do deployments. The final piece of this module is troubleshooting apps. Hey, nothing works the first time. You'd be amazed how much I learned by constantly breaking things, building the course. But again, that's how we all learn stuff, right? As things go wrong, you have to troubleshoot. You have to learn how to troubleshoot, what things are at your disposal. Again, understanding the constraints of your paths lets you know, how do I access to find out what went wrong? How do I debug? How do I do things that aren't in the same, maybe as when I'm running locally? How do I work in this environment? Those are invaluable skills to pick up. So as we think about troubleshooting applications and working in Cloud Foundry, what do we think about? What sort of things can go wrong? Well, an application deployment can fail, right? The network speed may not be enough, and so it's not actually being able to upload in enough time. You may have too many files, so maybe that's when you start using the CF ignore to exclude the unnecessary ones. Or you may be missing your quota because you've actually stored too much up there and you're running out of space according to your quota, so that's why a deployment could fail. You could have too short of a timeout, and maybe you want to increase it because your app is taking too much time to start up. Or it can't even detect your app type. Maybe for some reason it can't figure out which build pack to use. So maybe you want to explicitly choose which build pack and stack to use just to make sure the system isn't guessing incorrectly. Maybe the application won't start. Is it listening on the wrong port? Is there a memory leak issue that when it tries to start up, it just crashes itself? And we'll look at how you can debug some of that. There could be some unexpected consumption. You may be using more than you think you are. So you're trying to figure out, hey, how come this thing is using almost my full quota of memory for this container when I don't expect it to? So those are sort of issues that you might have in production as you have memory leaks, you've got issues there. And you may just have natural application crashes. Your application had an unhandled exception. It did something not very graceful and just completely tipped over. Those things can happen if you're using too much memory, or again, you're not properly working within the sandbox. In the third module, the next one, we'll talk through how some of this is handled automatically. But in this case right now, we'll talk about how do we use logs to help realize this happened in the first place. So let's talk about logs in Cloud Foundry. There's different types of logs. There's staging logs. You'll see the kind of precursor, the prefix in the logs. There's app for application-driven logs. There's LGR for some of the logging problems. There's RTR when there's the router is sending things. DEA writes to the logs. STG is when staging is happening. So there's all sorts of different types of logs that get written out. You can actually view the log list by doing CF files and jumping into the logs directory if I want to actually view the log files themselves. I can hit an individual log file by doing the CF command, files, website, or whatever your site is, your application, logs, and hitting that. But even better, hopefully, I'm hitting things in the CLI. I can do CF logs, and that command will actually show me the logs in a either streaming fashion, or I can do a kind of a tailing fashion, or just to see a static list of the most recent things. And I can also use CF events to drop off the major events in the application. Your application itself should be doing some traditional logging, console logging, or really to the std out, so that the CF logs can kind of pull all that together. And so you really want to push to that so that that's the centralized sort of logging mechanism so you can see application level logs even in these Cloud Foundry logs. And then finally, you can do some filtering. So I can do kind of grep commands and pull, hey, if I just want the app messages, or I just want the router messages, or things like that. So I have some ability to filter out some of these logs as well. In our final exercise, we're going to view the log list. We're going to dump some of those logs to the CLI and look at them in the command line interface, and then we'll do a really simple filter of a log. We're here in our environment again, where we're going to look a little more into some of the logs. I gave you a sneak peek before as we looked at CF files, but let's look a little closer. So if I'm here and I go CF files, and I have PS donation website 1 and then logs, I can look specifically in the logs directory, and I can look at a specific log if I wanted to see, well, let's look at this staging log and see what's going on there. I can look at the staging log information. It drops it out to the files, or the CLI. That's great. But most importantly, what I want to use CF logs. So you can type that in. You can see it tells you, if I do CF logs, hey, it expects an application name. I can use recent to do, instead of a real-time log, just a kind of the most recent things instead of a stream. So let's do, if we do CF logs, PS donation website 1 -- recent, it'll show me the most recent logs. And so I've got some app things. I've got the router. So I've got the stager, I've got the DEA, so I've got a number of things getting written out to the logs. And again, these are things I might write out myself, as there's been things in the application when you make requests that you can see things come here. So if I actually come to the website and make a request, or if I come here and make a donation, I can see that. If I come back to the CLI and I want to look to see if anything got written here, I can see donor 103, the parameter. I have the app out. I've got some things that the app is doing, the router is doing, some commands again. So I've got some things that I'm writing out. I've got some things that the system is writing out. Pretty cool way to do some quick troubleshooting of what's going on there. Likewise, I can do CF events for a particular application. So if PS donation website 1, and this will tell me some of the major events of things going on within the system. There's some auditing going on. Hey, the instances were out of sync. Now we're down to 1. So it's telling me the major kind of system events going on, not the logging per se, but two different things I can look at if I'm curious as to, hey, why do I have fewer instances? What's going on in the platform? Versus logs telling me what's the application health. If we want to quickly look at the logs too for the PS donation web service, there's also some things I believe I wrote out directly here. So you can see things I'm writing out like * getting record from Mongo. This is something I just wrote with console.log within the Node application. I was able to write this out fine to the actual application, so I can do some debugging this way as well. And so it just gives me a good set of things. I can also filter, I can do some grep commands, I can do some other things. But hopefully between the logs and the events and individual log files, you've got some things at your disposal here where you can do some trace statements, you can find out what the system is doing, and while you can't attach a debugger per se and see what's happening, you can definitely do some things to find out pretty clearly what's going on. The errors are relatively straightforward, and this should hopefully help you do some positive troubleshooting and tracking of your applications. We covered a whole lot in this module, so hopefully got a good taste of accessing the spaces and logging in and looking at orgs and switching around. We created a MongoDB application service instance, and we looked at how you manage and browse for those and maintain those. We looked at actually setting up an environment that was on parity on premises and then deploying to the Cloud Foundry environment, exploring some of the logging, exploring some of the settings and health settings. We scaled applications both up and out. We also did some basic troubleshooting by looking at events and logs and so forth. So hopefully all this gave you a good sense of how do I use the command line interface, what's happening under the covers when I do deployments and updates and scaling, and those sorts of things. In the last module, we're going to be spending some time on some advanced scenarios, worker roles, environment variables, some of the automatic failure recovery capabilities of the platform. So hopefully you'll enjoy that and see how you can do some pretty cool things within the environment that you may not know about.